there, Eddie, Ben, and Lucy. Today we are talking about prioritization. So a lot of times in our line of work, we're dealing with many competing priorities. There's never just one thing that's important. Oftentimes, everything's important. So how do you manage all of these very important priorities? How do you know when something gets done before something else, especially when you're dealing with the world of there are business requirements and asks, as well as tech requirements and asks, things like tech enhancements, tech debt? When do you address that? When you're just juggling all these things that are really important. So I'm throwing it over to the group. How do you coach people how to figure out what those priorities are and what they should be working on so that you're addressing what needs to get addressed for both the short term and long term?
I find it helpful to describe to people that, when we're talking about prioritization, we're saying, what value do we want to bring? And there's three types of value that I like to discuss with people. The first is the kind of like business financial transactional value that's the most visible, right? This is going to get us money, customers, et cetera, et cetera. And that's usually what people mean when they talk about prioritization. There's another one called strategic value, which is less easy to measure, and it takes longer to get feedback on. And those are things like customer relationships, ancillary markets, anything that kind of broadens the field for you, but doesn't necessarily make an immediate impact. And Alana, to your point, there's a third one, which is sometimes called enterprise value. There's other words for it, but that's anything that's directed inwardly. That could be the Agile transformation itself, technological uplift, bringing down tech debt, things like that. And the key point is you can't have all three at the same time. You have to budget where you want them to go based on what your objectives are.
I'll overlay a slightly different view and a very clinical view. And then I'm going to ask a question in response. Like, all of this is about providing like ROI, right? Return on investment. And that could be through selling more products. It could be through reducing cost. It could be through reducing risk. And we can basically do what's called a discounted cash flow on future cash flows to say, okay, what's the highest value thing? And economics and economists can do that pretty accurately using interest rates to get back to, okay, we should do this rather than we should do this. And actually, I think that encompasses probably all three flavors that Leo has spoken about. I think when you get down to that kind of level of clinical kind of prioritization, it requires you to be making good assumptions. And I assume that this is going to bring in this money. So when you're doing this process, you also then need to kind of go back and say, I made these assumptions. Were my assumptions good or bad? Because people can just always inflate their assumptions. They will always win the prioritization game. What I don't think that this assumes or recognizes is the costs incurred by making a prioritization decision to the team. So if I'm just picking the highest ROI, could I be disincentivizing the team? Could I be slowing the team down? Could they be demotivated and start to work slower? So if I pick a project that's high value, but they're also interested in, they might end up going faster than if I just pick the highest ROI and they're not very interested in it. So is there an allowance? So I just talked very mathematically. You could sit down and spreadsheet this. When you're doing your prioritization, do you see product owners who take an allowance for the team's willingness to do work as well as the value of that work to the business? So I don't know. Do you guys see that? Do people negotiate like that with your teams?
I've seen where teams have been really passionate about, say, like their architectural uplift, and did it during a time of year, like say around the holidays, where there wasn't much of a cost to new development because there wasn't any plan for new development during that time because of code freezes and what have you, just towards the end of the year being slower naturally. But I haven't seen it be a conversation where a product side would have to actually make the sacrifice to bend to what the team would rather work on, because keeping in mind that the product owners also have their bosses, right? It's not just the product owner saying, hey, like, yeah, you guys, like, let's work together on what it is that we're working on. But the product owner is also having their orders from their higher ups of what they want. So how do you manage that as well when there's like quite a few a few moving parts that are trying to decide what the team's working on.
I mean, the dictionary definition, sorry, Luigi, I'll be very
No,
quick.
go
The
ahead.
dictionary definition is there is only one person who decides what they should be working on. They have complete autonomy. That's how you manage it, or that's what Scrum says, and Scrum's silent on everything else, so it doesn't really help us. Sorry, Luigi.
I don't know if this helps, like my point of view, maybe from what happens in, I don't know, a day to day in a, I don't know, an employee working in a team, that maybe it's not about Agile, but sometimes what happens is that there are a lot of things to do, which does not allow us to focus, right? And focus is very important in order to prioritize. And the way we help our clients is that you need to have in mind very clear what is it important for you, like what is it that you want to achieve, right? Which is like a higher order, I don't know, or purpose or task or whatever. And once you have clarity about that, the way to prioritize is, okay, which is the task that you need to do that will make you go to that higher goal. And that task also would make the other ones less important. So by doing that question, like what is it that you need to do that will make the other priorities or tasks less important, that is what you need to do right now. And that's a way to understand which one is important, which is urgent. And when there are urgent tasks that maybe are not aligned to your purpose, we suggest to, okay, allocate some time in your calendar for things that you didn't know that may happen during the day, so you can focus there at that moment, but that won't take you out of your track. But I don't know if this is relevant while working in Agile teams.
Yeah, I think it is. And we could expand further and bring integral into this to say, if we're talking about prioritization, if you are in an amber culture, you are essentially going to be handed something and there'll be an expectation that you do as you're told. If you're in an orange culture, it'll be much more similar to what Ben described, where everything is mathematic, rigorous, you can attach an ROI to anything. And then I think if you're in a green culture, again, to the point that Ben raised, is the team interested? Is the team passionate about what it is they have to do? And then obviously, maybe not obviously, that's why we're doing this. But in a teal culture, you would expect that each team member intrinsically understood what the most important thing there was to do, because they're connected, their personal purpose is connected to the organization's purpose. So there's alignment and they don't actually really need to be told anything because they live and breathe what the objectives are.
One piece of advice we could give to folks watching this about how they can improve the way they're doing prioritization, or maybe they haven't even started yet, what would be your one thing that you would say, this is what you should do to get started, to move towards a better list of priorities, to better understand what it is that you should be working towards?
I think one thing for me is, we're explicit about the cost. So we say number of story points is a common way of saying the cost. The ROI is benefit divided by cost. We're not very explicit about the benefit, and we don't test ourselves on that benefit, and we don't check that benefit. And we kind of say that's because it's a product owner's job and we'll trust them and they can go by gut. I've seen teams who force a conversation around benefit, and it does two things. One, it forces the product owner to be slightly more accountable than they would have been to the team in the past. But also it forces them to articulate the why. And off the back of those conversations, I see much more innovative ideas coming off the back. So I think I can achieve this. The team can say, well, we could achieve that by doing this at half the cost. So I find that those kind of conversations help.
We were talking a lot about the team's willingness to do something and how we factor that in, and if we factor that in. And we were talking a lot about, kind of setting up ROIs or doing these kinds of analyses. For me, I think often how we prioritize isn't by what is the most valuable thing, no matter how much we try to strive towards that. We end up prioritizing towards who makes the most compelling case. And even if it is a product owner who makes the final decision, it comes down to who makes the most compelling argument for doing something. And I mean, business can be highly politicized. as well. I don't think those are factors that we can value, like kind of take out of. And I think I don't know that we need to consciously factor in for the willingness of the team or desire of the team to do something, because I think that within itself, if there's a high drive to do something, the case to do that will be much more compelling because we'll come up with much more compelling reasons to do something. We'll have more motivation to do that. So all of a sudden it'll look like, wow, this is strategically completely the best thing to do, not factoring in willingness of the team. But the only reason that we've come to that conclusion is because we've put so much more effort into building a case for doing this than we have for the other 5, 6 topics we could have done that we don't really want to do. So I don't know if that, it doesn't kind of cover it naturally.
All right. Well, very curious to hear what our viewers have to say. Let us know in the comments below. Really curious to hear about how do you prioritize things? Was this helpful? Give us some tips. Why not? So reach out to us and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We have more videos for you, and we will include a link to our levels video, which is some of what we talked about. You heard Lior earlier talk about amber and orange and some colors in there and teal. So we'll explain what all of that is. If you click to the link below, you'll be able to get more information. Thanks for stopping by.